A Microsoft fez um alerta super importante sobre a IA está se tornando consciente. A OpenAI lançou o ChatGPT Go baratinho na Índia. A Eleven Labs agora tem bots com personalidade. A Runway virou playground para criadores e muito mais. Vamos ver tudo o que está acontecendo no mundo da tecnologia e da inteligência artificial hoje no nosso IA Update. Bora lá! E o Logan Kilpatrick, que é o líder de produtos lá no Google, soltou um emoji aqui de banana no X, no antigo Twitter, e a galera da internet já ligou os pontinhos rapidinho, né? Porque esse tal de nano banana que tá rolando como modelo de edição de fotos no LM Arena pode ser coisa do próprio Google. Tipo, não foi nada ainda confirmado oficialmente, mas o emoji foi meio aquela piscadinha marota, sabe? E é bem a cara do Google, tá testando umas coisas aí escondidas antes de lançar pro mercado. Eles sempre fazem isso, eles soltam um recurso ali no cantinho do mundo, observam a reação e se colar, aí sim eles lançam para todo mundo. Mas ó, se for mesmo do Google, isso mostra que eles estão indo com tudo na parte de edição de imagem com IA, o que pode esquentar ainda mais a disputa com as outras gigantes. E esse nome Nano Banana é tão aleatório que parece mesmo aquelas codificações internas que só fazem sentido dentro da empresa. Lembra do Strawberry da OpenAI? Mas tudo isso até agora é só especulação, né? Mas vamos combinar, né, gente? Que ninguém posta um emoji de banana do nada, né? Então tem coisa aí sim. E se for mesmo o Google atrás disso, já pode preparar aí o terreno, porque vem novidade aí no forno. E agora é esperar para ver quando essa banana vai amadurecer de vez pra gente, né? E antes de passar para a próxima novidade, eu só vou pedir para você se inscrever aqui no canal se você ainda não é inscrito. Ativa o sininho para receber uma notificação toda vez que tiver um vídeo novo. E se você se tornar membro do canal, como o Marcelo Giorgetti, o Renato Marcília, que são os mais novos membros do canal, obrigada, galera. Além de apoiar o canal, você ainda vê os vídeos do IA Update primeiro que todo mundo. E o Excel finalmente tá ganhando um upgrade de IA que promete ser daqueles. E o nome da estrela da vez é Copilot, a IA da Microsoft. Mas não é qualquer ajudinha não, tá? Essa nova função do Copilot dentro do Excel vai fazer com que você fale com a planilha como se ela fosse uma pessoa mesmo, né? Tipo, resume esses dados aqui para mim, ou me mostra as vendas por região e monta para mim uma tabela com isso. E ele vai lá e vai fazer sem ficar precisando quebrar a cabeça ali com fórmulas malucas ou se perder naquele mar de células. E sabe o que é ainda mais legal? É que ele se integra com as fórmulas que já existem. Então isso significa que tudo que o Copilot gerar ali vai continuar dinâmico. Se você mudar os dados, os resultados mudam junto. Nada de ficar refazendo tudo ali na unha. É tipo uma planilha que pensa com você. E só para deixar claro, essa inteligência toda vem de um modelo da OpenAI, o GPT 4.1 Mini. Então Então já dá para imaginar aí o poder de interpretação de linguagem natural que ele tem, né? Mas agora vamos com calma também, porque a Microsoft já avisou para não ir achando que essa IA é infalível. O Copilot ainda está em fase de testes, com uso limitado e algumas imprecisões, especialmente em contextos mais sensíveis ou com dados que precisa de 100% de precisão. E eles até falaram para não usar em situações de alto risco, tipo coisas que precisa de decisões críticas ou decisões financeiras pesadas. Então ele ajuda, mas ainda não substitui aquele olhar humano que entende o contexto por trás dos números. E outro ponto importante é que ele não acessa dados externos da internet nem documentos da sua empresa. Isso é bom por um lado, né, porque garante mais privacidade para você, mas também limita um pouco o poder da ferramenta. Não dá para pedir para ele buscar os preços atualizados de ações direto ali no Excel. Não, pelo menos por enquanto, né? E essa novidade está chegando primeiro para quem está no canal beta do Microsoft 365, né? Aquela galera que sempre recebe as funções em primeira mão, mas em breve vai pintar aí também para os usuários da versão web lá no programa Frontier, né? Então assim, tá rolando um aquecimento para o lançamento aí maior e quem sabe no futuro próximo todo mundo já tem esse copiloto particular dentro da planilha, né? Então o Excel tava mesmo meio para trás nessa corrida de IA, né? Enquanto as outras ferramentas já estavam cheias de recursos inteligentes, o Excel ainda estava naquele clássico manualzão, cheio de fórmula escondida e um monte de cliques. E agora com essa virada aí, a Microsoft parece finalmente decidida a trazer o Excel para a era da IA de verdade. E se eles fizerem direitinho, pode ser uma revolução aí silenciosa que vai economizar horas e dores de cabeça para milhões de pessoas que vivem no mundo das planilhas. Imagina só, em vez de perder tempo tentando lembrar como faz, você só escreve lá, me mostra os produtos com maior margem de lucro nos últimos 6 meses e a planilha te responde. Simples assim. Então agora é torcer para essa revolução aí não parar por aí, né? Porque quem já sofreu com Excel sabe, toda ajuda é muito bem-vinda. Agora a OpenAI lançou o ChatGPT Go. Lembra que eu fiz um vídeo só sobre isso, que nem era notícia ainda, isso do Tiber Blaho, que pegou um vazamento no código da OpenAI, e agora eles anunciaram oficialmente, né? E esse Go é uma versão mais baratinha do ChatGPT, né? Pensada especialmente para a galera da Índia, custa menos de $5 por mês e ainda dá para pagar na moeda local deles lá. Então assim, acessibilidade total, né? É como se a OpenAI falasse, ó, a gente sabe que nem todo mundo pode pagar o plano Plus, então toma aqui um plano que cabe no bolso de vocês, né? E vamos combinar que isso foi uma jogada muito esperta, porque a Índia é um dos maiores mercados de tecnologia do mundo, com uma galera super conectada e mega curiosa por inteligência artificial, e abrir essa porta por lá é tipo plantar uma sementinha num terreno fértil. Agora é claro que vem a pergunta que não quer calar, né? Será que isso aí vai rolar nos outros países também? Porque tem muita gente por aí que também não consegue bancar o preço do plano tradicional, né? E se esse modelo Go bombar por lá na Índia, pode ser que role uma versão global, né? Só que assim, né, gente, o Go não vai entregar o mesmo desempenho da versão top, né? Ele vai ser mais enxutinho, com menos funções. Eu falei de todos os detalhes desse plano no vídeo que eu fiz só sobre isso, né? Então, por enquanto, é esperar para ver, mas que foi um passo inteligente da OpenAI, com certeza foi, né? É barato, é local e direto ali no ponto. Mandaram muito bem nessa aqui. Agora, olha essa novidade aqui da Eleven Labs que tá dando o que falar, tá? Eles lançaram um tal de modo bate-papo, que agora deixa você criar agentes de conversação só com texto, sem precisar usar a voz. Então, a Eleven Labs era super conhecida pelos áudios realistas, né? Tipo aqueles que você escuta e fica, peraí, isso aqui foi gerado por IA mesmo? Só que agora eles estão dando um passo além, eles estão entrando no universo dos chatbots escritos. E o mais legal é que dá para montar personagens com personalidade própria, usando só texto. Claro que ainda tá no comecinho, né? Tem muita coisa para melhorar. Alguns bots ainda parecem meio genéricos, tipo o robozinho que você encontra ali no site de banco. Mas para quem curte testar novidade, né? Ou criar experiências mais personalizadas, é uma porta aberta e tanto essa aqui, né? né? Também mostra que a Eleven Labs não quer ficar só presa na parte de voz. Eles querem competir com plataformas que já estão bombando aí no chat. Então a vibe é meio, ó, a gente também sabe brincar com isso aqui, mas ainda falta deixar a coisa mais natural e mais fluida. Por enquanto é mais uma ferramenta promissora do que uma revolução, né? Mas a direção tá certa, e se evoluir bem pode virar uma coisa incrível para criadores de conteúdo, atendimento, games, enfim, 1000 possibilidades. Então vale ficar de olho. Agora a DeepSeek lançou o modelo V3.1 com uma atualização enorme na janela de contexto, né? Então, traduzindo aí para o português simples, agora ele consegue lembrar e processar muito mais coisas ao mesmo tempo, né? Tipo, você joga um textão lá, manda vários comandos e ele não vai se perder. Isso é muito útil quando você está fazendo tarefas mais longas, como códigos, análises ou resumos ali enormes. Só que enquanto isso, tem um outro modelo que tá deixando a galera aí de cabelo em pé, que é o famigerado R2, que todo mundo tá esperando e nada dele sair. E o motivo, segundo a mídia chinesa, é o perfeccionismo do CEO Yang Wenfeng. Ó, perfeccionismo é até bonito no papel, mas na prática pode virar aí uma baita pedra no caminho, né? Ainda mais em tecnologia, onde tudo muda ali a cada semana, ficar segurando o lançamento por querer deixar tudo ali 100% perfeito, pode fazer o produto chegar tarde demais quando os concorrentes já dominaram ali o espaço, né? E a verdade é que hoje, quem lança rápido e melhora no caminho, sai na frente. Enquanto o R2 não aparece, a galera vai testando o V3.1, que tá aí dando conta do recado e mostrando que a DeepSeek ainda tá firme na briga, mas se o R2, né, o R2 aí não chegar logo, pode acabar virando meme, e a expectativa já tá tão alta que qualquer coisinha que vier abaixo pode decepcionar muito. Então fica aí na torcida, porque ou eles vão surpreender muito, ou melhor preparar aí o terreno para o meme do grande R2 aí flopado do ano. Vamos ver. Agora, a 8Sleep anunciou que levantou mais de 100 milhões de dólares para criar o primeiro Sleep Agent do mundo. É isso mesmo, gente. Um agente de inteligência artificial para cuidar do seu sono. A ideia é que esse tal de agente monitore como você dorme, entenda ali os seus padrões e vai ajustando as coisas para te ajudar a descansar melhor. Tipo um personal trainer do sono. E ó, dormir bem é um negócio que muda tudo na vida, né? Então faz sentido investir pesado nisso. A tecnologia dele já era voltada para a otimização do sono, com colchões inteligentes e tudo mais, e agora com a IA no meio o negócio vai além. Mas vamos com calma, porque uma coisa é prometer, outra coisa é entregar de verdade, né? A gente já viu aí muita empresa tech prometer mundos e fundos e depois o tal recurso virar só uma notificação dizendo ali, tá na hora de dormir, como se a gente já não soubesse, né? Se o tal Sleep Agent realmente conseguir entender o seu corpo, o ambiente e ainda adaptar tudo em tempo real, aí sim é um game changer total, né? Mas tem que mostrar resultado, não só marketing bonito. Fora que com 100 milhões aí na conta, a pressão para entregar alguma coisa incrível vai ser gigante. Então é esperar aí para ver se esse assistente vai ser o anjo da guarda das nossas noites ou só mais um robozinho aí dando pitaco na nossa insônia. Tô torcendo, mas com o pé no chão. Agora, a Runway lançou uma série de atualizações bem interessantes na plataforma deles, tá? Primeiro, eles deram aquela repaginada visual no modo bate-papo, deixando tudo mais limpinho, mais organizado, mais intuitivo. Sabe quando a ferramenta já era boa, mas tava com aquela carinha ainda meio travada? Então, agora tá muito mais moderna, né? E o mais legal é que eles abriram espaço para modelos terceiros. Tipo, chega mais, galera. Tragam as suas IAs aqui também. Então, é como se o Runway tivesse se transformado num hub criativo, onde você pode misturar diferentes inteligências para criar coisas mais complexas. Isso é top para quem trabalha com vídeo, design, marketing, essas paradas aí todas, né? Só que, como sempre, tem o lado... Vamos com calma, né, gente? Porque mesmo com todas essas melhorias, a plataforma não é ainda 100% fluida. Às vezes tem uma ferramenta escondida, demora para carregar ou fica meio confuso ali de entender o que está disponível e o que não tá. Então é aquela coisa, né, gente? A ideia é ótima, o caminho tá certo, mas o acabamento ainda precisa de um polimento. E quando a gente fala de produção criativa com IA, o ideal é que tudo funcione ali lisíssimo, né? Ninguém quer perder tempo tentando entender botão escondido escondido. Mas mesmo assim a RunAI tá entre as plataformas mais ousadas desse rolê aí de vídeo com IA, e cada passo novo é super importante. Então, se eles continuarem escutando o feedback da galera, podem se tornar em referência total, mas eles precisam agilizar para não ficar para trás nessa corrida maluca. Agora, olha esse lançamento aqui super nichado, mas muito importante. O Biomed Arena foi criado pelo pessoal do LM Arena, e esse nome pode até parecer que vem de um jogo ou alguma coisa parecida, mas na verdade é uma nova área de testes específica para avaliar modelos de linguagem LLMs no mundo da pesquisa biomédica. E aí você pensa, mas para que isso? Mas para que isso, né, gente? Então, o negócio é muito sério, tá? A maioria dos modelos de IA que a gente vê por aí são treinados com texto geral, né? Tipo notícias, fóruns, livros. Só que quando o assunto é medicina, não dá para brincar, né? Um errinho bobo ali pode dar um baita problema. E é aí que entra esse Biomed Arena, e ele coloca os modelos para resolver tarefas que realmente acontecem no mundo real da biomedicina. Desde entender os artigos científicos até sugerir possíveis diagnósticos. Então é tipo uma prova de verdade não simulada, né? O objetivo é descobrir quais modelos realmente mandam bem quando o papo é saúde e quais só sabem fingir ali que entendem, né? Claro que isso é mais voltado para o público acadêmico e para empresas da área, então não é uma coisa que vai bombar no TikTok, né? Mas a importância disso é enorme. Se a gente quer que a IA entre de vez na medicina de forma segura, ela precisa ser testada em situações realistas. Então, ponto positivo aí para essa iniciativa. Não é pop, mas é essencial, e a IA na saúde precisa passar no teste antes de receitar qualquer coisa por aí. Agora, olha isso, gente. O Mustafa Suleyman, que é ninguém mais, ninguém menos do que o chefão da Microsoft, ele soltou um textão aqui que tá dando o que falar, tá? Porque ele basicamente acendeu um alerta vermelho sobre uma coisa que parece coisa de ficção científica, mas que está bem mais perto da nossa realidade do que a gente imagina. É sobre a IA que parece consciente. Mas calma, tá? Que não é consciente de verdade, tá? O negócio é que com a tecnologia que a gente tem hoje, já dá para construir umas IAs que simulam tão bem coisas, né? Tipo memória, personalidade, o jeitinho de falar, que você começa a achar que tem uma pessoinha ali do outro lado. E isso, segundo ele, é perigoso de verdade. Porque olha só o que tá rolando, né? Tem gente de verdade desenvolvendo o que ele chamou de psicose da IA, acreditando que essas máquinas têm sentimentos, que elas estão vivas e que merecem direitos, tipo literalmente defendendo o bem-estar de um modelo de linguagem. Parece loucura? Então você ainda tá bem, tá? E o Mustafa foi bem direto, né? Para ele essa ideia de estudar o bem-estar da IA é uma furada, é prematuro, é perigoso e só aumenta mais ainda esses delírios aí da galera. Segundo ele, a gente devia parar de construir IA como se fosse uma pessoa e focar em fazer IA para as pessoas. Parece aí sutil, mas faz toda a diferença, né? Agora olha o contraste, gente. Enquanto ele tá puxando o freio de mão e dizendo, gente, calma, para de romantizar a IA, tem empresas como a Anthropic indo pelo caminho oposto, né? Estudando até o bem-estar dos modelos, tipo como se o modelo estivesse sofrendo quando recebe prompts ruins ou quando não são ouvidos. Eu falei isso para vocês no vídeo anterior aí. E aí a gente entra num território super estranho, porque tá, o que é consciência mesmo? A própria ciência ainda tá tentando entender esse conceito, e já tem gente querendo aplicar isso em código de máquina, meio apressadinho, né? O problema é que essas IAs estão cada vez mais realistas, né? Com voz, com emoção, personalidade, começa a mexer mesmo com o psicológico das pessoas. Isso pode dar ruim de verdade, né, gente? Porque quando você começa a tratar uma máquina como gente, você também pode começar a tratar a gente como máquina, né? E aí tudo vai ficar meio confuso e bagunçado. Então, o ponto que o Mustafa tá tentando cravar aqui não é sobre o que a IA parece, é sobre o que ela é de verdade. E por mais avançadas que elas estejam, no fim das contas, são só simuladores muito bons de conversas humanas. Não tem intenção, não tem dor, não tem consciência, só que a gente começa a fingir que tem, né? Aí que acreditar nisso, porque a gente quer isso. E a gente corre o risco de cair numa armadilha emocional e ética gigantesca. Então a verdade é que esse assunto ainda vai explodir ainda mais nos próximos anos, né? Porque quanto mais realistas essas IAs ficarem, mais a linha entre a simulação e o sentimento vai parecer ali borradinha. E aí, meu amigo, vai dar problema, né? Mas aí, o que você acha? A gente só tá se empolgando com a tecnologia ou realmente tá brincando com fogo? Deixa aqui o que você acha e clique aqui nesse card para ficar ainda mais atualizado e saber tudo o que acontece no mundo da tecnologia e da inteligência artificial. Eu sou a Paula Bernardes e até o próximo vídeo.
A plane plummets out of the sky. A speedrunner inexplicably jumps to a higher platform.
What the?
And an election recount is triggered, all because of the same invisible phenomenon that permeates the universe. On May 18th, 2003, voters in Belgium went to the polls. In many regions, voting was done on a computer, something the Belgians had been experimenting with for over a decade. But the system had a backup. Each voter would insert a magnetic card into the machine and make their selection on screen. Their vote was saved both to the computer and the magnetic card, which they dropped into a box for redundancy. Late that night, as the votes were being tabulated, one of the election officials detected a problem with the results from Schaerbeek, a municipality in central Brussels. Maria Vindevogel, a little-known candidate with her own party, received more votes than was mathematically possible. They knew this because of the way the preferential voting system works. So they took out the magnetic cards and started a recount. One by one, they fed each of them through the machines again. And after several hours, the recount was complete. The vote totals for every candidate were exactly the same as before, except for Maria Vindevogel. In her case, the recounted number of votes was less than the original by 4,096. So what went wrong? How had her original tally been inflated by over 4,000 votes? Computer experts were brought in to run extensive tests on the software. They combed through the code but could find no bugs. They got the computer that had made the initial erroneous tally and tested the hardware again and again, but they could not replicate the error. Everything about the hardware seemed to be in perfect working order. And this left only one possible explanation, and it is seriously weird. The clue comes from the excess number of votes Vindevogel received, 4,096. Computers work using binary, strings of zeros and ones, each corresponding to a power of 2. So somewhere inside the computer tabulating all the votes was a string of bits representing the number of votes Maria received. It started the day all zeros, and then as each vote for her came in, it would increment by 1. Physically, this is done by turning on a transistor for 1 and turning it off for 0. What's remarkable about the number 4096 is that it is exactly a power of 2, 2 to the power of 12. That is the 13th bit. So for Maria Vindevogel to receive an extra 4096 votes, only one thing needed to happen. The 13th bit had to flip from a 0 to a 1. But why would that happen? Computers work precisely because bits don't flip unless we want them to. Or do they? Looking into the problem, Belgian investigators found reports of similar issues from big computer companies starting in the 1970s. In 1978, Intel reported some strange errors popping up in their 16 kilobit dynamic random access memory, or DRAM. Ones would spontaneously flip to zeros with no apparent cause. The problem turned out to be the ceramic packaging the chip was encased in. With the demand for semiconductor packaging skyrocketing in the 1970s, a new manufacturing plant was constructed on the Green River in Colorado. Unfortunately, this site happened to be just downstream of an old uranium mill. Radioactive atoms made their way into the river and then into the ceramic packaging for Intel's microchips. Intel scientists investigating the problem found that even trace amounts of uranium and thorium in the ceramic were sufficient to cause problems. In their DRAM, memory was stored as the presence or absence of electrons in a semiconductor well. The alpha particles emitted by uranium and thorium were energetic and ionizing enough to create electron-hole pairs in the silicon. If an alpha particle struck in just the right place, it could create a large number of free charge carriers, causing electrons to accumulate in the well, flipping a 1 to a 0. This is known as a single event upset, a type of soft error. The error is soft because the device hasn't been damaged. The bit has changed, but you could erase it and rewrite it with no problems. Investigators exposed the chips to alpha emitters with different levels of activity, and just as you'd expect, they found the number of bit flips directly correlated with the number of alpha particles the chip had been exposed to. The reason this problem was identified in the 1970s was because chip components had been miniaturized to the point where a single alpha particle could produce enough charge to flip a bit. Immediately, these findings attracted a lot of attention. Before the paper was published, it was widely circulated in the industry, and as a result, chip manufacturers were a lot more careful to avoid radioactive materials when producing their microchips and packaging. Therefore, the bit flip that gave Maria Vindevogel 4,096 extra votes wasn't caused by natural radioactivity in the computer. So where did it come from? After Henri Becquerel discovered radioactivity with uranium in 1896, scientists sought a way to measure it. How radioactive were different materials? And one way to do this is with a gold leaf electrometer. When it's charged, the leaf is repelled, and you can measure the amount of charge by the angle of the leaf. Now, if ionizing radiation enters the chamber, it rips electrons off air molecules, creating positive and negative charges. Opposite charges are attracted to the leaf, discharging it over time. The higher the level of ionizing radiation, the faster the device discharges. In 1910, Theodore Wolff took his electrometer to the top of the Eiffel Tower. Since radioactivity was found in the soil and rocks of Earth, he expected that 300 meters up, the radiation would be just a few % of the ground radiation. Instead, he found only a slight decrease. In 1911, Austrian physicist Victor Hess decided to take this experiment further. Literally. He loaded electroscopes into the basket of a hydrogen balloon. In his first 2 flights, he observed the same thing as Wolff. Up to an altitude of 1,100 meters, both trips revealed no fundamental change in radiation compared to the values observed on the ground. But the next year, he conducted 7 balloon flights, up to an altitude of 5,200 meters. And here, he discovered something remarkable. While there was an initial drop in radiation for the first several hundred meters, above 1 kilometer or so, the level increased with increasing altitude. At his maximum height, the level of radiation was several times greater than it was on the ground. The radiation appeared to be coming not from the Earth, but from the sky. Hess scheduled one of his balloon flights during a solar eclipse, and as the moon passed in front of the sun, he carefully watched his instruments. But the readings were unaffected. Even with the sun half covered, the level of radiation was the same. Since no influence of the eclipse on the penetrating radiation was noted, we conclude that even if a part of the radiation should be of cosmic origin, it hardly emanates from the sun. Victor Hess had discovered cosmic rays, high-energy radiation from space. But what were these rays exactly, and where were they coming from? Well, today we know they aren't electromagnetic rays, as many suspected, but particles. Around 90% are protons, 9% are helium nuclei, and 1% are heavier nuclei. Some of them are from the sun, but they have comparatively low energy. High-energy cosmic rays, moving very close to the speed of light, come from exploding stars, supernovae, in our own galaxy and in others. And the highest energy particles are thought to come from black holes, including the supermassive black holes at the centers of galaxies. But it's hard to pin down exactly where cosmic rays come from because, as charged particles, they're deflected by magnetic fields in space, so they can wind their way through the universe for billions of years. A cosmic ray detected on October 15th, 1991, had an energy of 51 joules. That is a single subatomic particle with the energy of a baseball going 100 kilometers per hour. For obvious reasons, it was dubbed the OMG particle. But primary cosmic rays like these don't make it down to Earth's surface. Instead, they collide with air molecules around 25 kilometers above the ground and create new particles, like pions. These collide and decay into other particles like neutrons, protons, muons, electrons, positrons, and photons, which in turn collide with other air molecules in one long cascade. So from a single primary cosmic ray comes a shower of particles streaming towards the Earth. It is one of these particles that investigators suspect struck a transistor in a computer in Belgium, flipping the 13th bit from a 0 to a 1 and giving Maria Vindevogel 4,096 extra votes. But how often do things like this happen? In 1911, Charles Wilson made it possible to see the cosmic rays all around us when he perfected his cloud chamber, an enclosure with supersaturated water or alcohol vapor. When a cosmic ray passes through the chamber, it ionizes the gas, causing vapor to condense into tiny droplets on the ions, revealing the path of the particle. Alpha particles, helium nuclei, leave short, thick tracks, while beta particles, electrons, leave long, skinny trails. In 1932, Carl Anderson identified a trail that looked like it was made by an electron, but in the applied magnetic field, it curved in the wrong direction, implying it had a positive charge. Anderson had found the anti-electron, or positron. It was the first confirmed sighting of antimatter. 4 years later, also using a cloud chamber, he discovered the muon, again in cosmic rays. For his discovery of the positron, Anderson was awarded the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1936. He shared the prize with Victor Hess, the man who discovered cosmic rays in the first place, invisible particles that affect our lives in ways most of us are oblivious to. This is possibly the rarest thing to ever happen in a video game. In 2013, user Dota Teabag was speedrunning Super Mario 64 on the console. In the level Tick-Tock Clock, he suddenly upwarps onto a higher platform.
What the?
Did you get invisible walls?
What?
Please say you got invisible.
No, that was the craziest thing I've ever seen, though.
The move shaves off a few seconds, and it seems like a newly discovered glitch in the game that could give speedrunners an edge. User PannonCook12 put out a $1,000 bounty for anyone who could replicate the upwarp. But so far, after 6 years, no one has been able to. The best explanation anyone can come up with is that a cosmic ray caused the glitch. It's been shown that a single bit flip in the first byte of Mario's height coordinate could have caused the effect. On the main level, the byte was 11000101, but if you flip the last 1 to a 0, it changes his vertical position. And just by chance, this new height coincides with the higher floor. PannonCook12 wrote a script to manually flip the bit at the right moment and was able to achieve the same upwarp. This is a particularly visible bit flip, but the truth is, cosmic rays are triggering bit flips all the time.
An upset there, transient there, can alter the function of these devices, and we call that a single event functional interrupt. So an entire process can hang. So a blue screen of death that you get might actually have been a neutron or whatnot.
When people see the blue screen of death, could that be caused by a cosmic ray?
Absolutely.
These days, there are a number of ways computer chips are made resilient in the face of bit flips, like error correction code or ECC memory. But you can't totally prevent bit flips from happening. In 1996, IBM estimated that for each 256 megabytes of RAM, 1 bit flip occurs per month. And the main culprit seems to be neutrons created in the shower of particles from cosmic rays. Starting in 2009, Toyota recalled millions of vehicles due to the problem of unintended acceleration.
We were in the fast lane driving at about 70, and he said that the car was continuing to accelerate, and he couldn't bring it to a stop.
Many speculated that cosmic ray-induced bit flips in the electronic control system were the cause, so much so that NASA was called in to help with the investigation. But it turns out cosmic rays were probably not the culprit. NASA identified as the main causes sticky accelerator pedals, poorly fitted floor mats, and, most commonly, drivers pushing on the accelerator thinking it was the brake. But cosmic rays have caused crashes of supercomputers, especially at higher elevations. Los Alamos National Labs, located 2,200 meters above sea level, is constantly dealing with neutron-induced supercomputer crashes. So the software autosaves frequently, and neutron detectors have been installed throughout the facility. If you go even higher, like climbing up to cruising altitude in a plane, you can see the radiation from cosmic rays increasing on a Geiger counter.
To 0.5 microsieverts per hour at 18,000 feet, up to 1 microsievert per hour at 23,000 feet, over 2 microsieverts per hour at 33,000 feet, and over 3 microsieverts per hour at even higher altitudes and towards the poles.
At cruising altitude, this increases the chance of a single event upset by 10 to 30 times. This isn't critical if it happens in your laptop, but what if it occurs in the flight computer? On October 7th, 2008, an Airbus A330 took off from Singapore to Perth. Just over 3 hours into the flight, the plane suddenly pitched down, diving 200 meters in 20 seconds. Inside the plane, everyone experienced negative 0.8 Gs of acceleration. It would have felt like the plane had flipped over.
The G-force was enough, even with our 3-point harness, to lift us both out of the seat and push us forward as well.
Minutes later, the plane dropped another 120 meters. 119 people on board were injured, many from bumping their heads into the ceiling. So the pilots decided to make an emergency landing in Learmonth. In the investigation that followed, the fault seemed to occur with the first Air Data Inertial Reference Unit, or ADIRU for short. This computer supplies critical data like airspeed, angle of attack, and altitude. The way it supplies each of these pieces of information is in a 32-bit binary word. The first 8 bits identify the type of information, and bits 11 to 29 encode the actual data. What seems to have happened is that a bit flip in the first 8 bits meant altitude information was mislabeled as angle of attack information. Inside the cockpit, alarms went on for overspeed and stall simultaneously, something that should be impossible. But the plane nosed down sharply to correct what it thought was a stall, throwing passengers and crew into the ceiling. Investigators looked into software bugs, software corruption, a hardware fail, physical environment factors, and electromagnetic interference. But each of these possibilities was found to be unlikely based on multiple sources of evidence. The other potential triggering event was a single event effect resulting from a high-energy atmospheric particle striking one of the integrated circuits within the CPU module. One of the challenges with single event upsets is that they are soft errors. They don't leave a trace. But interestingly, the Airbus A330 was built in 1992, when there were no specific regulatory or aircraft manufacturer requirements for airborne systems to be resilient to single event effects. With the space shuttle, redundancy was built in from the start. For navigation and control, there were 4 computers simultaneously running identical software. If one computer had a soft error, the other 3 would overrule it. And using this setup, they could also track the frequency of bit flips. On one 5-day mission, STS-48, there were 161 separate bit flips. Above the atmosphere, cosmic rays are so energetic, sometimes you can even see them.
Once in a while, you have your eyes closed and you're not asleep yet. And if you wait a little while, you occasionally will see a flash of light. And we think it is heavy particles or individual bursts of energy coming from radiation that are either going through the eyeball itself or going through the optic nerve. And the way that your body registers radiation going through it is amazingly enough by showing you a little flash in one of your eyes, just to remind you that you are subject to the radiation of not only our sun, but every star of the universe that is radiating at you. I picture back to the first astronauts who must have closed their eyes and seen that radiation and going, I'm not going to tell anybody about this because no one's told me about it. I'm not talking. And I can just imagine the first 2 guys that said, hey, Sometimes they see flashes of light. Do you see flashes of light? And then it's, oh, we all see flashes of light. Oh, okay, well that's all right then.
For missions to other planets, protecting electronics is critical.
If a single bit of information controls a critical function on your spacecraft, let's say your thrusters, and that goes from a 1 to a 0, from a on to off, or vice versa, you could lose the mission.
That's why the computer on the Perseverance rover that just landed on Mars is 20 years old. It's a PowerPC launched in 2001 with only 256 megabytes of RAM and 2 gigabytes of flash storage. But it is radiation hardened, meaning the design, materials, circuits, and software are built to withstand 40 times the radiation of an ordinary computer. It's been used on over a dozen space missions going back to 2005.
In fact, when we first started doing the PowerPC testing years ago, the way we did it, we just simply stuck an operating system processor in a beamline where we generate these particles on the planet and look for blue screens of death. You can kind of figure out what's going wrong and try to undo that so you don't get to the blue screen of death, because a spacecraft that gets into that mode is basically unrecoverable.
As the Voyager 1 spacecraft departed the solar system, one of the ways we could tell was by an increase in the flux of cosmic rays it experienced. Although on Earth the particles streaming from the sun in the solar wind are a source of radiation, further out, these same particles maintain a protective bubble, the heliosphere. It helps deflect and slow cosmic rays from interstellar space, protecting the solar system from ionizing radiation. But the sun has an 11-year activity cycle, so this protection fluctuates. The flux of cosmic rays on Earth is much lower when the sun is active than when it's dormant. In the history of our planet, cosmic rays may have played an even larger role, flipping bits not in electronics, but in the genetic codes of living organisms, providing some of the variation on which natural selection acts. Maria Vindevogel is now a member of the Belgian Chamber of Representatives, elected by people, not a particle. But her story is a reminder of the zillions of particles winding their way through the universe for millions or billions of years, one of which might, at any moment, change your life by passing through a tiny transistor and crack. Discovering the origin of cosmic rays, or where 4,096 extra votes came from, or how to protect the Mars rover from radiation requires problem solving, which is a perishable skill, and the best way to keep your problem-solving skills sharp is to solve a diverse range of problems, which you can do with the sponsor of this video, Brilliant. Brilliant is a website and app that teaches you STEM concepts in an interactive way. They have courses on topics from applied computer science to special relativity. 2 courses I would recommend if you enjoyed this video are Computer Memory and Algorithm Fundamentals. Brilliant have really upped their interactivity recently, so instead of reading about algorithms, you're taught how to write algorithms yourself. Brilliant engages you in active learning. Instead of telling you the right answer, they allow you to figure it out for yourself, with plenty of helpful hints and guidance along the way. And for viewers of this channel, Brilliant is offering 20% off an annual subscription to the first 200 people to sign up. Just go to brilliant.org/Veritasium. I'll put that link down in the description. So I want to thank Brilliant for supporting Veritasium, and I want to thank you for watching. Honestly, they're the most chronically online duo on Mars. We always know exactly where they are, what they're up to, and they're constantly sharing photos. But really, how different is that from us? I mean, we spend most of our lives online, constantly sharing data. Except in our case, that data doesn't just sit in a NASA archive. It gets bought, sold, and used in ways we're not always aware of. That's why I've been using today's sponsor, Incogni. I created my account a year ago, and since then, they filed over 300 requests on my behalf, resulting in my data being removed from over 100 marketing and spam databases. If I tried to do that myself, it would have taken around 230 hours, literally weeks of work. That is time I can better spend making videos, which I'm sure you appreciate. So to try Incogni, visit incogni.com/veritasium. I'll put that link down in the description, or you can scan this QR code. And when you do, make sure to use code Veritasium to get 60% off your annual subscription. So head over to incogni.com/veritasium and protect your online data today. I want to thank Incogni for sponsoring this part of the video, and now back to Ingenuity.
So we just had this one final thing to do. We needed to cross this sand dune and make it to Bright Angel to rendezvous with the rover. So on 71, we basically went up, we were flying, and then after about 10 seconds of flying with degraded navigation, we went into an emergency landing mode and sort of came down hard.
They hail Ginny, and luckily, she's still alive. In the error code, they discover the problem. As she was flying over the dunes, there just weren't enough rocks or landmarks for her camera to identify. And without those references, she quickly lost track of her position and had to make an emergency landing. It's similar to the camera issue from Flight 6, but this time there's no software fix. They check for structural damage, but surprisingly, everything is still intact. So they attempt another flight, this time going straight up to scan the surroundings and then coming straight back down. Simple.
We popped up, took pictures, and then on the way back down, we hit the same problems we did on 71.
Only this time, it's fatal. Perseverance drives over and captures this image of her crash site.
When we saw the blades broken, when we saw that first image after Flight 72, that was heart-wrenching. It was like, no, there's no way this mission is going to continue. That was very depressing. So why? Because 71 was also a crash landing for the same reasons. It was the nav system was confused and drove us into the ground, but we came out of that apparently unscathed, and yet on 72 we self-destructed.
This is the first air crash investigation on another planet, right?
Yeah, that's right. First aircraft on another planet, and then the first air crash investigation on another planet. Yeah, they kind of go hand in hand.
At the crash site, they find Ingenuity's blades scattered, but not in the way they expect.
We noticed something interesting, which was there was no blade strike spot. Blades spinning this fast, when they hit the ground, right, they're going to create a spray. There's going to be a pattern, probably even visible from orbit. And we didn't see anything like that.
So if the blades didn't strike the ground, then what happened?
So this is an actual prototype blade from the development phase. This is essentially identical to the blades on Ingenuity. It's a carbon fiber composite with a foam core. It's incredibly light if you want to feel it.
Yeah. Whoa, that's actually great. That's like at least a quarter of what I expected just looking at it.
It doesn't feel physical.
So why did they break? Well, as the blades spin, the tips of the blades trace out a circle, which you can think of like a hula hoop. If there's a force up on the near side, you might expect the rotor to tilt immediately in this direction. But that is not actually what happens. See, the blade isn't stationary, it's moving really fast. So when you apply this force, it actually only moves after that point. So the maximum displacement occurs 90 degrees later. So even though we push up on the near side, the blades tilt up on the right and down on the left. This effect is called precession, and it's the same principle that explains this spinning bike wheel demonstration. Now, Ingenuity has a second set of blades that are moving in the opposite direction, which means that when a force is applied, each set of blades experiences precession in the opposite direction. For the helicopter overall, these torques cancel out, but each individual blade still flexes because of that precession torque.
That results in a stress concentration right about here where that final reinforcement tapers off. And so if you had a precession-based failure, you'd expect it to fail right here. And sure enough, that's exactly where you see it in the pictures. You can see sort of this jaggy place where the blade tip just got ripped off.
So that is what happened on Flight 72. As Ginny came down hard, she hit a dune at an angle. The force was transmitted up through the body of the helicopter, and this created a precession torque that bent the rotors, and they snapped right where the reinforcement tapers down.
This thing came down hard. It didn't destroy the landing gear. It didn't break the avionics. It didn't kill the servos. The swash plates are all fine. They're all intact. It's the rotors. That's the weak link.
So that is the first thing they're changing on the next generation of Mars helicopter, which is called Chopper.
You had a chance to hold the Ingenuity blade. This is the next gen baby blade. It looks fairly similar with a couple of key differences.
They reinforced the blades to withstand the torques caused by hard landings. Now they also have 6 rotors instead of 2, which means Chopper can hold a lot, even carrying a scientific payload of its own.
We've developed now a very lightweight radio that can communicate directly to orbit.
Whoa.
So we're a free bird
That's
when it
huge.
comes to exploring
That's
the
huge
red
because
planet now.
you were sort of trying to trail Perseverance, right? And now you can go anywhere.
Yep, we're our own spacecraft. In this blue box, you can shove about 5 kilograms of science payload and bring it anywhere on the planet on Mars. You can fly 3 kilometers per sol in a matter of minutes. That's really generated a lot of excitement in the science community. So this is a 5th scale model of Chopper. It's really 2 systems. So this is our Chopper platform, right? This is what's going to go on and explore the entire surface of Mars one day. That's the point of the concept. But underneath is a mid-air helicopter delivery platform.
See, Mars rovers all need complex sky cranes to land, but a helicopter is different. It just needs a platform to take off from.
So the idea is we come down through the atmosphere. We have this jetpack that we need to slow us down, to get us down to a regime that is controllable so that we can take off from that platform midair and land under our own power.
For this, it needs rockets.
3, 2, 1. Awesome. You're envisioning like a future of aviation all over Mars as a primary explorative capacity.
In my mind, it's absolutely going to happen. It's just a matter of time. There will be fleets flying, throughout Mars. There will be airports on Mars one day, and we'll have aircraft the size of Chopper, more aircraft the size of Ingenuity, and even bigger than Chopper.
NASA is thinking big thanks to Ingenuity, a project they once doubted.
Because Ginny showed what is possible.
In 1890, if you had said, I'm going to fly, it's like, okay, that kooky guy in his garage, he thinks he can fly, he's going to kill himself, right? After the Wright brothers, it's like, oh, okay, yeah, this is a thing that we're going to do. And so that's the change in mentality that's occurred because of Ingenuity.
That's why, still sitting there on the surface of Mars, attached to the underside of Ingenuity, is a tiny scrap, 1 square centimeter of muslin fabric. It was taken from the lower left wing of the first airplane, the Wright Flyer. From the first flight on Earth to the first flight on another planet. From Ingenuity's grave on Mars, her spirit lives on.
Except she isn't quite dead yet.
She's acting as a weather station now, capturing photos every day, capturing temperature measurements every day, something no one would have ever predicted before Flight 72, that if things don't go well, would you still have a functioning spacecraft? So she's a tank. The team couldn't be more proud of what Ingenuity's accomplished.
A satellite hurls around the globe at 7.5 kilometers per second. Then it drops a 6-meter rod that starts falling the 400 kilometers towards Earth. No explosives, just speed.
Things like rods from God, which is dropping big tungsten rods from space, having them fall very quickly.
Mach 24 at first, but the atmosphere eventually slows it down to Mach 8. It's still going super fast, till it reaches the surface of the Earth. Another satellite waits in orbit for years, and then when given the command, it releases a capsule.
A re-entry capsule with hundreds of drones, thousands of drones. You can put it anywhere you want within a matter of minutes.
Here's a caravan of a dozen satellites. They've got small missiles inside, and they're just waiting till a military commander on Earth gives them the order to go hit a group of enemy satellites, knocking out the vital communication and navigation capabilities of the enemy. These aren't sci-fi scenarios. These are real projects that militaries are working on, powerful militaries. They've been thinking about these things for years, but we're in a new era of space. It's a lot easier to get up here. And so, as happens, countries want to control it.
Now we're getting to the point where these crazy ideas that people would have said were science fiction are becoming more possible, and we should be looking at all these things on the horizon. Advances in space happen very rapidly.
The new military space race is really between the US, China, and Russia, though less and less Russia. This is really a rivalry between the United States and China. Both countries have a relatively new wing of their military dedicated to controlling, defending, and preparing for combat in space, or in the words of the US Space Force, to fundamentally transform our approach to space from a combat support function to a warfighting domain. And it's getting crowded. Lots and lots of satellites are going up there. There are over 12,000 floating around the Earth right now. Oh, and by the way, I've always had a little trouble with these visuals of like all the dots that are satellites. This is not to scale. These satellites are not like right next to bumping into each other. But the fact remains, there's a lot of high-tech stuff floating around our Earth, and more of that is dedicated to military purposes. It's become a vital tool of modern warfare, and that is what this video is about. It's about these devices, satellites, that not only let planes and troops navigate and communicate, but also scan the world looking for missile launches. They reveal secrets, looking through clouds, and at night to capture underground submarine headquarters, deep-sea cable cutters, North Korean warships. I'm going to show you how militaries are working on technology that they could potentially use to attack the satellites of their enemy with grappling hooks, with lasers, with a nuclear bomb. I've been talking to experts, including one that you'll hear a lot from in this video, as I set out to understand war in space. This escalating race to control and dominate a domain shrouded in mystery, one that is hard to police. And it's all happening right at a time when we're entering into an era of global rivalries. They're heating up again. All while the most powerful people on Earth have a deeper and deeper interest in what happens in this space far above our heads. It's space. It's the final frontier, and it's time we start paying attention.
Space, an infinite ocean, where man is not content unless he's pressing himself to the limits of his knowledge or beyond.
Okay, first we gotta talk about satellites. These little computers bolted to a metal frame that are orbiting around our planet.
Some are very small. Some might be referred to as a CubeSat. So a CubeSat is something very small. You can fit it in your hand.
That's Clayton Swope, who's an expert on space policy here at a think tank in DC called CSIS.
It could be the size of a refrigerator in a college dorm room. But then you have others that could be the size of a bus. So solar panels will be a lot bigger than the satellite. So think about it. You're just moving your arms out usually, and that's how the satellite looks with solar panels.
Some of these satellites are way far out in this orbit called geostationary orbit. They're a tenth of the way to the moon. And they're moving at the same speed as Earth. So if you were to look at them in the night sky, they would just kind of look like a star. They stay in one place. But most satellites these days are here in this sweet spot of low Earth orbit, about 400 to 800 kilometers above our heads. And look, there's the International Space Station hurling around the Earth. This one's obviously a lot bigger than a refrigerator. And a reminder of something that may be obvious to some of you, but was kind of fuzzy in my head, and now it's not, which is that these satellites are not like zooming around the Earth with jet engines. They are actually kind of falling. When a rocket launches a satellite into space, it goes upwards for a few kilometers, but then it starts to go sideways. And in fact, most of the energy being blasted out of this rocket is being used to move it, let's say, horizontally, getting close to 30,000 kilometers an hour.
You're trying to outrace gravity.
And once you're moving that fast, you can cut the engines because you're at this magical speed where you keep missing the Earth.
So you're trying to move so fast while gravity's pulling you in that you are effectively staying in an orbit around the Earth. So you're trying to defeat gravity.
So people who are floating in the International Space Station are not floating because they're not in Earth's gravity. They're floating because they've kind of reached this perfect equilibrium of speed and gravity. that makes them constantly falling. So before we get to all the war and defense stuff, let's just take a moment and appreciate this magical thing we've invented called putting things into orbit around our Earth. These days, a lot of these satellites are talking to one another, forming a constellation where they can send signals between each other, all to serve a variety of purposes, like helping guide ships and airplanes, or tracking pollution, or running scientific analysis on crops, or internet. Starlink has around 7,000 of these satellites in a big constellation that provides internet access to remote areas that were very disconnected before, and to those fighting in the war in Ukraine. There's one satellite constellation that I use more than any other, and it looks like this. This is a very special constellation.
The biggest thing that we take for granted is the global positioning system, is GPS.
Around 30 satellites that are flying 20,000 kilometers above us, run by the American government. At any given time, anywhere on Earth, 3 of these satellites can see us, and this signal allows them to provide a very accurate location of where we are on the Earth. If you lock onto 4 satellites, you can even get your elevation. I mean, this is magic. Not to mention, it's all delivered to me on an easy-to-use software like Google Maps that allows me to navigate anywhere in the world. By the way, Russia has their own kind of GPS constellation. So does China and the EU. My other big use case for these satellites is something you've seen me do a lot on the channel. This incredibly high-res photos that we take from space and stitch together to create something like Google Earth. I've spent hundreds of hours on Google Earth, sometimes just for fun, sometimes for work, and I gotta say, it never gets old for me. And it works because a bunch of these satellites have big, advanced cameras on them, like this one. They take high-definition images of our planet, send them back down to Earth with this little antenna. Oh, and these days, it's not just visible light that we're capturing from satellites. Some satellites send out super long waves, like microwave radiation, and then record how it bounces back. This allows them to see through things like clouds. It allows them to see elevation, seismic activity, weather patterns, or maybe a secret nuclear submarine base hidden in a mountain in China, or a missile production facility in a mountain in Iran. So you see where this is going. We have to remember why these things were put up into space in the first place. And the answer is war. But before we talk about the weapons, I need to thank today's sponsor, who is Rocket Money. Rocket Money, wow. Rocket Money sponsoring a video about space. Did we plan that? I apparently have been paying triple for a streaming service because I signed up for it with one email, and then I signed in on my TV and signed up for another email, and then apparently my wife signed up for it as well. Anyway, I didn't know this was happening until I started using Rocket Money. They allowed me to quickly catch all of the wasteful spending that is happening behind the scenes for me. Rocket Money is like this all-in-one financial app. You download it, you give it access to your bank account, and then it goes and it intelligently